right. Sound check. Sound check. I think it is okay. I haven't noticed our custodian of sound on recently. I hope he's okay. So regular before. So hope he's okay. Normally, first one here, checking the sound. That's why he's the custodian of sound. But, okay. Anyway, we have Black Rose, we have Ultimaza, Sean Stryker, also regulars doing the sound check. So thank you guys. All right, welcome everybody to Can Hammer TV. It is the last day of the Trump presidency. End of a era, 4 years of comedy gold, and coming to an end. The writers at Saturday Night Live must be crying. There's really not a lot of material when it comes to Biden, not like Trump. And so Saturday Night Live will suck again until the next election, when hopefully some character comes along that they can get their groove back. But yeah, it was good while it lasted. And tomorrow we see the inauguration in the now called militarized zone that is known as Washington. And we'll see what happens. Apparently, there's going to be a star-studded event. And that's kind of weird in the backdrop of, like, basically a walled-off Capitol with all this troops and stuff. Anyway, it's kind of crazy. The season finale of Season 4 of America, the reality show, airs tomorrow. What will happen? Who knows? Anyway, enough politics. Welcome, guys. Tonight we'll be talking about Dreadnoughts, doing our unit deep dive on Dreadnoughts. For some reason, I skipped them, and actually that was probably a good idea because they got updated in the recent rules. So we'll talk about them tonight. First, some announcements. So big congratulations and shout out to Colin and Mitch and Chuck and the guys at Best in Faction for running the Hammer Out Cancer virtual charity event this weekend. If anybody caught any of the action either on BiffPod stream or right here on Can Hammer, the action was fast and furious and very entertaining, and the commentary was quite good. And so that's all great, and they raised $12,000 for charity, which is amazing considering this was going to be a, just a makeshift version of Charity Hammer and not the big deal. They still raised so much money. So we, as always, are happy and proud to be part of that collaboration. And some congratulations to those guys on raising so much money. And thank you to everybody for being so generous in this harsh times with your money and giving it to people in need. Thank you very much. In other news, and this is funny. So, I donated, so I got entered into the draw, the raffle, and I actually won the grand prize, the commission painted, beautiful 2,000 point Necron army. That was the last giveaway. I didn't have a chance to watch it. I watched it afterwards and discovered that Val won the second prize, the orc box. Val Heffelfinger, who does not need any more orcs, and I won the commissioned Necron army, which is cool. But it's the last thing I need is another army, and it's so beautiful. I don't want it to just sit on a shelf in the corner of my basement, and so I actually just asked. I declined and asked Colin, and we agreed that we would give it to the person who donated the most money. And so Noah is the winner of the Necron Commission Army, and he's going to be super happy with it. So that's cool. And Noah donated a huge amount of money for the event and also played in it, and so he's deserving for sure. So that's Hammer Out Cancer event. Went cool, very good. And hopefully, all things going well, we can have a proper charity hammer in the summertime. That's the current plan, but we'll see how it goes. Despite changing of government, doesn't look like really too much happening on the COVID front down south, and so it's going to be a big determinant of how things go. COVID is doing okay here, but it's a really dicey time right now, so we'll just have to see. Speaking of COVID, so 40K League news, of course, we were aiming to start the 40K League in March 1st. That now looks really, 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 really unlikely and actually probably impossible, given the state of COVID right now, not only here, but in Toronto and all places around Toronto. So stay tuned. We're still deciding what to do, but we're not really in any particular rush, and we'd rather people be safe than get hurt trying to play 40K. So we've always wanted to do this, but in a safe fashion. So we will start when it is safe. And so stay tuned for that news on the 40K League. All right. So I think that is all the news we have to get out here. So let's go into our deep dive. So tonight we're going to talk about Dreadnoughts. Dreadnoughts in general were really bad in 7th and really for a lot of 8th. It was rare that you would see a Dreadnought. I think some of the earliest Dreadnought sightings were probably like the Libby Dreadnought from Blood Angels, or maybe Space Wolves Dreadnoughts if you saw Space Wolf player, but you didn't see a lot of Dreads. And then we started to see maybe the occasional Redemptor Dreadnought when that came out, but really not a lot of Dreadnoughts. And that's mostly because of cost, the fact that they weren't particularly tough, and that they used to get -1 to shoot when they moved because of heavy weapons. And a lot of Dreadnoughts had heavy weapons. That was the point of a Dreadnought. So it just wasn't great. And of course, Dreadnoughts came back in a huge way with the Marine book at the end of 8th, and really just the Leviathan. But you saw other Dreadnoughts too. You saw Redemptors, and you started to see the quad las cannon, Forge World Dreadnoughts. You started to see Dreadnoughts coming in as gun platforms, and then you saw the famous Chaplain Dreadnoughts. That was after the Broviathan, Leviathan Dreadnought era. And of course, Broviathan, the Leviathan Dreadnought, basically dominated LVO, and then got put in its place. So, and then since then, really, in 9th, we have seen a lot of Dreadnoughts as well, because of the changes to vehicle rules. That was probably the main reason we're continuing to see Dreadnoughts now. And the change, and that includes a number of things. So, the Custodes wise, the only Dreadnought you really saw from us were, so you've never seen the Contemptor in the Codex because, quite frankly, it sucks. And when our beta rules came out, you saw Telemons, because at that time, the Arachnus gun, all the guns were really good, and it gave us what we were missing: long range anti-vehicle firepower. So the Telemon would just stand at the back and pelt things downfield, and it was really good. And then it got triple nerfed for no obvious reason than just cause. And then you saw the memes that I used to post everywhere of people's Telemons in the garbage. And then that was it. We never saw the other Dreadnoughts because they had heavy weapon penalties, and while the Telemon also had that penalty, it didn't have to move that much often. So, but the other Dreadnoughts were more combat-wise, and there was no easy way of getting them into combat. And they were, despite being pretty cheap, actually, it was just, they weren't particularly compelling. So, with our new book, and particularly with 9th edition Dreadnoughts, our Dreadnoughts have new life. So now with no penalty to fire heavy weapons, that's a big boost. The ability to shoot into combat with -1, that's good, but, not really super awesome. Price reductions, and Dreadnoughts getting like a bunch of other rules and strats and things like that. We're finally starting to see our Dreadnoughts popping up in people's lists, and competitive lists as well now with some of the more recent changes. So even before recently, you didn't see too many because they only had 4 attacks, and some of the data sheets were not particularly compelling. But now they are very compelling. So hopefully after tonight, we'll have a good idea of how a Dreadnought might work its way into your list and what it can do for you. So tonight we will be concentrating on the Forge World Dreadnoughts, the Aculus, the Galatis, and the Telemon. We will mostly forget about the Codex Dreadnought. We'll talk about it very briefly in a minute, and then we're just going to forget about it. And we'll be doing a lot of comparisons, mostly between the Aculus and the Galatis, because they're basically right beside each other. And we will do obviously a lot of cross comparisons with Marine Dreadnoughts. And the Telemon is harder to compare. It's kind of in a class of its own and a bit unique in the game. So we'll be talking a lot about the Telemon as well. Or you may hear me refer to the Telemon as Bertha or Big Bertha. This is what I call my Telemon. And some people have cottoned onto that and started to call it Bertha as well. Anyway, just in case, I use those two terms interchangeably, Bertha and Telemon, just so there's no confusion. Okay. So, first of all, before we start, let's talk about the Contemptor, which is the Codex Dreadnought. I do not have one because I refuse to buy a lump of plastic that looks so shit. But it's possibly the ugliest Dreadnought ever made. Even uglier than like the old Dreadnoughts with like the weird arms and stuff from like the 80s or 90s. Like, yeah, is the boxiest, ugliest thing. And so that's horrible. And certainly it has no consistency with the way the rest of our faction looks. It does not fit in at all. It fits in even less than the Land Raider. Even when you paint it gold, it just does not fit. And it's basically... yeah, it looks like it's been left in the 7th edition. Like, it's the worst. 155 points, you get something that still degrades. And whereas our Forge World Dreadnoughts now do not degrade. And for the sake of one wound, basically. And so it's just crap already. And then it just gets crappier as it goes. It has a one-shot multi-melta. And... the multi-melta only has one shot. The Space Marine version of the multi-melta arm has 2 shots. So even the multi-melta is half as good as the Marine version. And it does not have -1 damage yet, I don't believe. But yeah, it's just crappy. And then you can change that though for a 6-shot old school assault cannon that really sucks ass. And yeah, and the multi-melta, it does have the new damage, but it's only 12 inches, and it doesn't get rerolls to wound or anything like that, like any of the other kind of melta that's kind of in our books. Yeah. You know, yeah. It's 2 up, 5 up, 6 up fuel pains, no tougher than any of our other Dreadnoughts. So basically, it really sucks. There's no reason to use this. We don't need its weapons. We don't need its combat potential. We don't need how it looks. We don't need this lump of plastic. Don't take it. What could happen to this Dreadnought to make us use it? Well, I think the only thing that could happen to this Dreadnought is if the weapons get better. You know, like assuming you're not going to turn it into a totally different type of Dreadnought. If you want to leave it as a gun-toting Contemptor Dreadnought, then you need to improve its weapons. I think we would see a lot more of it if it could take 4 las cannons, right, for like 150. Now, if you're going to add another 100 points onto that for las cannons, no thank you. I think it would be better if it had maybe like 2 multi-meltas with the like Eradicator type multi-meltas, or maybe if the cannon got a bit buffed to something else. Or I mean, there's so many things you could do, but yeah, like the way it is right now, it just really, really sucks, and it looks ass as well. So we're not going to talk about it anymore tonight. I gave it its 5 minutes of fame, and that is it. Okay, let's move on. Not too salty though, eh? Not too salty. Okay, so let's talk about, the first thing we always talk about is modeling. So, of course, the Aculus and the Galatis, I hope I don't offend people with how I pronounce these words, are Forge World Dreadnoughts. These are 2 of the most beautiful Dreadnoughts that you will ever find. I think the only Dreadnought I maybe like more than this is like the Thousand Suns thing with the Egyptian thing, but maybe you're not really into that look. But these guys are just freaking awesome. This guy, sorry, I'm just kind of dancing, but They're awesome models. They're basically exactly the same except for the arms. So you can just do what I do and magnetize all the arms and swap them around. So so this one's the Galatus with the sword and shield. So I made it kind of like standing behind the shield, ready to poke you. And this is the Achilles with the spear. Okay, and so you should always magnetize the waist pelvis, okay, for transport purposes, and you should magnetize each of the arms, okay? For this, the arm's not magnetized, but I magnetize the spear, and this guy's arm's magnetized. And this guy, for example, arm is magnetized, and the shield is magnetized. And Forge World Dreadnoughts come with this little hole there, which actually is perfect for putting magnets in. They made it for magnets, so you might as well use it. And so these guys are awesome. Okay. Otherwise, these are amazing models. The arms and legs come in like 4 or 5 separate pieces, which is a bit fiddly to adjust, but you need green stuff and some quick hands. But when they are infinitely posable, you can pose them however you like. They're just really nice models. Super good, super good. And so you can make them as crazy or as cool as you like. All right. And they also come complete in one box, one Dreadnought, all the weapon options. The Telemon is this thing, which is much bigger. And the Telemon, unfortunately, comes with a body, and then you have to buy each arm separately, okay? Which then, although it lets you get all the weapon options, but in total, you can buy up to 2 fists and 2 of each gun. So that's 6 extra things you need to buy on top of the body. It's Forge World for you. But, of course, you should magnetize them. And again, they have these slots which allow you to magnetize very easily. And both your arms should be magnetized so you can build whatever version Telemon you need from now to the cows come home. So you should always do that. And I also magnetized the, the missile pod, but you don't really need to do that. You can see the profile is pretty smooth, so it doesn't matter. And I actually didn't build this one, but you should magnetize the pelvis so you can transport it easier. But there you go. So that's the Telemon. That comes in, the body and all the different arms. So it does add up a little bit money-wise once you start to do that. But you definitely should do that. Again, it comes in multiple parts, arms and legs, so it's very posable in anything that you want. The body itself is just a solid chunk, so it's not as posable. And then the other cool thing about the Telemon is these big, wide open, flat spaces where you can really use some artistic talent and do what you want with those flat spaces. Really nice for artistry if you're an artist. But there you go. Okay, so that's enough about modeling. Let's get on. Okay, first of all, we're going to talk about roles and keywords as usual. So slots. The Achilles and the Galatus are both elite slots, which unfortunately does conflict with the elite bloat. This is probably one of the reasons we never really saw the Dreadnoughts, because you would have limited elite slots, and then you have a Vexilla, which was basically a mainstay, and then you would maybe have like a Terminator unit or something. And so now in 9th with running a patrol, because we didn't want to run battalions back then too much, then you ran out of elite slots, and so you didn't have a slot for your Dreadnoughts. And so now, if you wanted to run a Vanguard, now you're paying 3 CP for the Vanguard to have those slots, and then now you don't really want to spend extra CP on Eternal Penitent and all those other things, or to deep strike them, and so it just didn't work very well. Now more people are running double patrol or battalions because of the rise of Sagittarium and cheaper Shield Guard. And so now you have lots of elite slots, and so you can fill them with Dreadnoughts. Also, people have been dropping the Vexilla, so there's an elite slot there. And some people even dropped the Terminators completely, and so there's extra elite slots. So you're starting to see them more because of that. Also, they got better so they could take up some of that slack, Now, Big Bertha is a heavy support, so he doesn't really conflict. The only thing he really conflicts in was with the Caladius, which is kind of dead right now. So the Telemon never conflicted, and so it was always easy just to slot that into a heavy spot. So, keywords. So first thing to say is the Achilles and the Galatus are core, which is good, which means they'll continue probably to benefit from reroll auras and Vexillas and things like that. The Telemon is not core, which may be significant depending on what things happen to our book. But whatever things happen that only goes to core will not affect the Telemon, so that may be a downer for Bertha to go back on the shelf. But we'll see. Certainly with Bertha, especially if you're shooting, you definitely want some reroll auras there to make her much more reliable, so the lack of core may be a big deal. But we'll have to see. We don't really know what's going to be core in terms of abilities and things like that. But so just keep that in mind, and these are the new 4-drawer rules, so it's unlikely to change. Okay, next keyword that they all share is vehicle. This is both good and bad. I mean, it's good in that they've benefited from the vehicle buffs, so no -1 to move and shoot heavy, the ability to shoot into combat. But they do also suffer from being vehicles. So previous to the change to grind them down, they would give up secondary points. Being vehicles, they can't really benefit from a lot of terrain features, and there's a lot of things that re-roll against vehicles or do extra damage against vehicles, as we'll see later on. And so, I think actually being vehicles is a little bit of a downer these days than being okay. But yeah. Okay, the next keyword they all share, of course, is Dreadnought, and this keyword can be significant because our book, unlike Marines, for example, Dreadnoughts seem to be left out a lot of rules. And they have their own specific little strats here and there. But, for example, the Imperious Vexilla banner does not affect vehicles. So, being a Dreadnought, it doesn't, whereas like Marines is, infantry, bikers, and Dreadnoughts, right? So it's like being the Dreadnought is more of a downer for them and doesn't really give them too much benefit. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see what the new book brings and everything. And obviously they are Dreadnoughts and vehicles, and so they are not OBSEC, which we'll deal with later. Okay, and those are all the roles and keywords. Okay, so stats. Okay, so the Aculus and the Galatus are basically very similar because they're basically the same Dreadnought chassis but with different weapons with slight differences. So first of all, these two guys move 9 inches. That is basically the fastest Dreadnoughts in the game. Other Dreads at their fastest, like Contemptors and the Redemptor and the Leviathan, they move 8 inches. So our guys are 1 inch faster than those guys. Every inch counts. And also things like the Leviathan and Redemptor degrade and move slower. So being able to move 9 inches is great. And they also don't degrade anymore, so therefore they will always move 9 inches, which is a real bummer before to degrade and move slower. Secondly, ballistic skill, weapon skill 2, and combined with not degrading, means these guys are best in class in terms of hitting, shooting, and combat. This the only other Dread that hits and shoots on 2s is the Marine Venerable Dread, and that's it. Everything else in the Marine book hits on 3s. So that is huge. Strength 7, again, most Dreadnoughts are Strength 7 or worse. A lot of Dreadnoughts are Strength 6, so that's great. It's T7. So these two guys are T7, and almost all Dreadnoughts are T7, except for a few, like the Ironclad and the Telemon, obviously. Even the Leviathan is not T8 anymore. So T7 is kind of the normal for Dreadnoughts. 9 wounds is as many wounds as you can get without having to degrade. So I would much rather have 9 wounds than 10 wounds and degrade, for sure. So going down to 9 wounds and not degrading was a great change for these guys, and that's awesome. Degrading is so bad. You hit worse, your attacks go down, you get slower. It's like really bad. For the sake of 1 wound is really bad trade. Okay, and if you're going to go into the realm of more wounds so that you degrade, I gotta see at least 5 more wounds, like 14, 16 wounds, right? So like I don't think it's worth going to like 12 wounds and degrading even. I think you gotta hit at least 14, 15, 16 before it's worth maybe taking on the burden of degrading. Because then you can take 7 before you actually degrade, so it's not too bad. But if you're just going up to like 10 wounds, that's like stupid, that's bad. 12 that's bad too. So you want to go, I don't think there's any 12 wound Dreads, but you want to go up to like at least 14 before you start degrading. Okay. So recently they got buffed to 5 attacks base instead of 4 attacks base. For longest time they were only 4 attacks, so now they're 5 attacks, and this is basically really good, and they needed it. And unfortunately, Marines, they commonly only have 4 attacks, but then they get an extra attack when they charge and stuff because of shock assault and stuff like that. So in effect, they all have 5 attacks as well, or more sometimes. So this at least puts them up there in the same levels. 2+ save, class best. No other dreads have 2+ save except for the Leviathan. So having a 2+ save is obviously good. And the invuln save, 5+ invuln on the Aculus is pretty much, if Dreadnoughts have invuln saves, it'll be a 5+, and most Dreadnoughts do not have invuln saves. And the Galatas with his shield is a 4+ invuln, which is definitely now the best in class. There are no other Dreadnoughts with a 4+ invuln, not even Leviathan anymore. Sucker. So that is the best. 6+ Funeral Pain, again, for being venerable. I think it's the Venerable that gives them the Funeral Pain, or is it Contemptor? I can't remember. Venerable, I think. 6+ Funeral Pain is standard on all Venerable Dreads, and so, that's something. So, stat-wise, they're either the best or tied with the best. So, these are some of the best Dreadnoughts in the game. And we'll see later when we do comparisons. Okay, the Telemon really has not a lot of comparators, or any comparators. The Telemon and the Leviathan could be compared before, but the Leviathan has taken a number of dick punches and now no longer compares. I'm sorry, it does not compare. So the Telemon is T8. All right, so the only other things that's T8 is the Ironclad Dreadnought, which I can't remember ever seeing for a long time. As I said, the Leviathan is now T7. It moves 8 inches, which is great because that's as far as all the other Dreadnoughts can move. And but it does degrade and loses weapon skill, ballistic skill as well. It has 14 wounds, which is pretty much standard for dreads. I don't think dreads go higher than 14. And as I said, that's the minimum acceptable for degrading profile. And it has a 2+ save, 4+ invuln, and a 6+ feel no pain. So it's got the 6+ feel no pain as standard, but it has that 4+ invuln, which is so key. I don't think the Telemon would be even quite as good with only a 5+ invuln. So this dude with a 2+, 4+, 6+ feel no pain, T8, really good. And then you add other things on it, like, as we'll talk about later, Shadowkeeper strat and Vexilla -1 to hit, and now it's -1 damage. Like, this thing's hard to kill. In fact, we're going to talk later about how I compare this to shooting at Morty. Okay, and then finally, Strength 8. That is super rare to be Strength 8. There are lots of Dreadnoughts are usually Strength 6 or 7, but Strength 8 is very rare, meaning his fists are Strength 16, which wounds T8 on 2s, whereas all the other Dreadnought fists are Strength 14, wounding T8 on 3s. So that is a deal, and you pop Trajan next to this guy, and this guy's auto-hitting, auto-wounding anything. So there you go. So the Telemon. Okay, so those are the stats. Let's go into shooting. Okay, so probably the least shooty, in people's view, the least shooty is the Aculus. But is it really the least shooty? Well, let's see. Okay, so the Aculus really shoots from his fists. He's got guns mounted on the back of his fist and his spear as a gun, okay? Which used to be like a crappy D3 shooting, like crappy las cannon, basically, but it's gotten better. So, decidedly, our Dreadnoughts are combat-oriented, for sure, and they do good in combat, but this guy has quite a bit of shooting. So, first of all, he can shoot from the spear, which, as I say, has gotten buffs over the years. So, it shoots at 24 inches, so plenty of range, has 2 shots, so that's better than having D3 shots, and it is Strength 8, AP2, and flat 3 damage. I don't believe it used to be, I can't remember now. It's gone through so many changes, but it was never this good. So actually, a couple of shots at good range doing flat 3 damage, that's pretty nifty. And of course, he doesn't get heavy penalty or anything, whereas he used to before. So that's another thing. Okay, and then the fists, you got options actually. So the fists are very flexible. It comes as standard with Lastrum Stormbolters, which are like the ones on the Aquilon. So strength 5, -1, 1 damage, rapid fire 2. But he has 2 of them, so that's 4 shots. And it's actually 8 shots in rapid fire range. So that's not bad for one Dreadnought, 8 shots there. That's like 2 Aquilon worth of shooting. Still, the Lastrum suffers a little bit from not getting the heavy bolter buff, and so it's kind of shitty. But for 10 points each arm, you can upgrade it to the heavy flamer, which is still pretty shitty. It's a 12-inch heavy flamer, 6, strength 6, and the fact that it's still D6 shots is just kind of shitty. So I wouldn't pay the 10 points for the flamer, but what I would pay 10 points for are the twin Adrathic guns, 1 on each arm. So that's 4 Adrathics basically. So that's 4 shots, and typical Adrathic, strength 5, -3, flat 3 damage, 4 shots, and being assault as well. So I think in today's meta, that's what I would plump for, is the Adrathic. Unless you're playing really horde armies, then I would use the Lastrum. But, that's pretty sweet. It does bring his cost up another 20 points, but I think it's well worth it to make him quite a dual threat. Drops down, moves up, shoots, charges. It's pretty cool. Poo, 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 shoot the spear. Like, it's pretty cool just to see this guy in action. Okay. Now, with the Adrathics on board and the spear, it kind of synergizes. Like, he has a decent chance of doing a chunk of damage to like a T7 vehicle. With the combination of the spear and getting a couple of wounds through on the Adrathic, you're looking at, like 6 to 10 damage on a T7 vehicle. Like, it's pretty good. And then he can punch that said vehicle or punch a different vehicle. So it kind of synergizes well with his combat and the spear, whereas the Lastrum plus the spear don't really synergize well. So I think it also works better as a synergistic package to have the Adrathic with the spear. Okay, the final thing is, if you are going to deep strike this guy, obviously all the weapons can hit lots of targets on a 9-inch deep strike, so that's cool. Okay. Now, the Galatus really is a pure melee Dreadnought. He only has a couple of flamers on the sword there. That's his only shooting, and it's okay. It's like strength 6 flamer shots, but it's 2d6, and it could be really shitty. So it's something, and you can Overwatch or whatever. It's not even worth a CP, to be honest. But he's not here to shoot, so let's not talk too much about his shooting. Okay, now when we talk shooting, we have to come to the Telemon. So the Telemon is a very flexible Dreadnought. And the Telemon can either be completely melee, so he has 2 fists. He still will shoot 5 to 10 heavy bolter shots from up here, and his plasma injectors are basically flamers that do 2d3 shots. Okay, strength 6, -2, 1, so good flamer, but still flamers. So you're not really killing a lot of things with that profile. Or you can go the other way around and have 2 guns, 1 on each hand. And so the 2 guns are guns that we've seen before, so the Accelerator and the Arachnus. The Accelerator is basically pretty much the same as the Caladius accelerators. Same number of shots, so 4 shots each arm. And then strength 7, -3, 2 damage. So that gun used to be better, just like the Caladius gun used to be better, but it got changed like the Caladius gun. And it's only 48 inches and not 60 inches. So it is more limited, but with the tables these days, 48 is plenty. And then the Arachnus, of course, has the beam and the burst profile, just like the vehicles that we talked about last week. And a 36-inch range is, I believe, it's half of what it was before. I think it used to be 72 inches, which was amazing, but it got halved for no obvious reason. And then its strength used to be strength 9, I believe, doing flat 3 damage at -4 AP, and it got nerfed to strength 8, which is still good for picking off T7 vehicles, but definitely not as good against T8. And we used to use this thing to shoot knights. So definitely, and it rerolls against vehicles, of course, like all Arachnus. So it is not as good as it used to be shooting-wise, and it got its range severely chopped. Maybe that was in anticipation of smaller tables. We can see that now in hindsight. but you know, and the strength got nerfed a little bit. The Arachnus, both of these guns are really good against infantry. The Accelerator doing flat 2 is really good against 1 and 2 wound infantry, and the Arachnus obviously has much fewer shots, but is really good for medium heavy infantry. Now, Death Guard is going to be a different thing altogether, but other than Death Guard, you're picking off infantry with these guns really nicely, like intercessors, Gravis armor, stuff like that, really easily. And the Arachnus cannons are a 15-point premium, though. Everything else is now thrown in for free. So you can run a hybrid Telemon now, basically, whatever loadout, only pay for Arachnus upgrades. Okay, so probably the best shooting Dreadnought is the double gun Telemon. I don't think you can really argue that. Which gun you use really depends on what meta you're playing in. And then, actually, the Achilles probably has decent shooting for what you're paying for. And then the Galatas obviously doesn't have hardly any shooting, but that's not what you're paying for. So in terms of shooting, you know, that's what you're looking at from these dreads. And all of that kills one multi-melta shot and a 6-shot assault cannon. I'm sorry. I wasn't going to mention the Codex Dread again, but I just did. Okay, melee. So now let's talk about the fun stuff, which is punching. Okay, so now with all the dreads, with the 2 dreads getting the extra attack, it really has upped their damage potential. So let's talk about the Aculus first. Boom, with the big ass spear. So this guy is now 5 attacks base, up from 4. And hits on 2s, so with a reroll around him, and he auto hitting basically, never degrades. Strength 14, AP 3, and now it's D3 plus 3 damage. It used to be D6 at least 3, so now it's at least 4, which is better, with a decent potential for 5. So therefore, this guy could do a min potential of 20 damage, and an average of 25 damage, and a max of 30 damage from one guy. If you stick Trajan next to him, this guy is doing that reliably. And that's just cool. I mean, if there's no invulns we're talking here in combat, like, he is wrecking face. And that's amazing. And in this day and age of 3 wound dudes with -1 damage everywhere, Death Guard, this guy is a guaranteed Death Guard killer. Guaranteed. You know, even you don't need to roll the D3 unless now they don't have Phenol Pains. Like, you're just auto killing a dude every time. And so, yeah, there's only 5 guys, but you know, that's still good. And you put Eternal Penitent on this guy for an extra attack, like, yeah. So he's great at taking out vehicles. So, you know, T7 stuff. He's killing those on 2s and 3s. He's wounding T7 on 2s, and he's sticking so much damage on those guys. You know, like your Rhino's dead. Like, he's killing those things easy. Okay. And then T8 things like Knights and stuff, he's also doing work on those things. So, yeah. Yeah. So, Achilles is the melee shiz. Okay, let's talk about the Galatas now. So this is where people are really trying to compare these guys. You want the Galatas, you want the Achilles. So the Galatas is hard to know if he's supposed to be the combat specialist, or is this guy supposed to be the combat specialist who also has shooting. But the Galatas was supposed to be the combat specialist, but also he just happens to be the tougher of the two. And not really as much a specialist. But he's no slouch. So he has 5 attacks base, but he gets an extra D3. I wish you would just, you know, what would be a better rule would be like each attack makes 2 attacks. Like so many units have these days. That would push the Galatas forward. Instead of just adding a random, again, D3. Like, D3. Anyway, so he has at least 6 attacks, maybe up to 8 attacks. But he unfortunately is only 7 wounds, strength 7, and so that really lets him down. That is the big thing that lets him down. Whereas every other Dreadnought can be at least strength 12 or strength 14 with a combat weapon. So that really lets him down. And he is doing AP3 flat 3, but so does a normal Marine combat Dreadnought combat weapon. They don't even have a name for it. It's just called a Dreadnought combat weapon. So it's a little bit disappointing that is so. Obviously, he has more attacks, but potentially not that many more. And even still, he will kill infantry, even medium and heavy infantry, pretty reliably. So, and other than Death Guard, where he just goes down to flat 2, which is kind of sucky, he will kill 3 wound models pretty easily. And so he's still good at that, and he does have a couple of extra attacks. So, but against T7 and vehicles and things, this is not your Dread. Okay. Let's talk about Bertha. Okay, so Bertha. I should have got the other fist. Anyway, so Bertha in combat can be, obviously, if you don't put a fist on, it's very much crappy in combat. So while he hits all the time and he is strength 8, is 0 AP, 1 damage. So that's not good, but if you have a double gun, at least you can shoot the next turn into combat. But if you stick at least 1 fist on, and this was a recent change. So in the old days, you wouldn't see the fist unless you went double fist, because you didn't get the extra attacks unless you had 2 fists, and the fist cost more. But now, each fist you put on adds an attack, which is great. So now with even just 1 fist, that gives you access to the fist profile for all your attacks, but now you also get an extra attack. He still only has 4 base, so putting on a fist now brings him up to 5 attacks. 2 fists brings him up to 6 attacks, and then obviously if you put Penitent on him, that could be up to 7 attacks. And these are obviously hitting on 2s, Trajan's around or whatever, auto hitting. These are, as I said before, strength 16, so wounds almost everything in the game on a 2 with Trajan around, reroll 1s, auto wounding. I think the Mastodon is T9, but they're not, even Titans I don't think are T9. Anyway, some of them, maybe, I don't know. But wounding most things you're going to encounter on 2s, rerolling 1s. This thing is auto hitting, auto wounding, minus 4 AP, so if you have no invuln, you're basically screwed. No, AP 3, and 4 flat damage, which is great. So 3 damage against Death Guard, which is still good. So the Telemon is the bomb for combat 2. And you're like, whoa, Telemon's good at everything. Well, maybe it is. You're paying a premium for it. We're going to talk about that. But Telemon can be super punchy. And you can just come onto the Discord and ask people who have played with punchy Telemons before and how much fun that is. You're taking down knights, you're taking down all sorts of stuff with a punchy Telemon, and nobody can kill you in return. It's really quite fun. Okay. So, in terms of combat, I mean, they're all pretty good at combat, but the Galatus is no better than a normal Dreadnought, except for maybe a couple of attacks and hitting better. So he is better than a normal Dreadnought, but it doesn't seem like it's that impressive. The Aculus can really put out the hurt, and so can the Telemon. One could argue that the Telemon doesn't do almost twice as much as the Aculus, and potentially, actually, the Aculus can do way more if you roll your D3s hot. And the Telemon is obviously a lot more expensive, but is tougher. So these are all decisions to make, but either of those guys would be super punchy if that's what you need from your Dreadnought. Okay, abilities and rules. So they all have Garden Eternal. So they all have -1 damage now, which is so good. So they had nothing before. Then they got the old half damage strat when our book came out, which was great for a time, but we all knew that was going to get changed. And then it got changed to -1 damage, which was not as good, but still better than nothing. And now they all have it with on their datasheet like other dreads, so that's fine. So they're all -1 damage, which is only good and only fair because everyone else has it too. They are all venerable, so they have Unyielding Ancient for 6 Optional Pain, which is great. I don't roll many 6s when I do those, but it may help you. The invulns are actually in the rules. So the invuln is not from gear. The Galatus Shield gives a 4-up invuln and also gives him -1 to hit. So this is pretty big. That makes the Galatas much harder to kill in combat, to be -1 to hit in combat. If you've ever made someone -1 to hit in combat, it is really nice. And so, people hate doing -1 to hit on their Thunderhammers, for example, right? So giving people -1 to hit in combat is like good. So that's a great rule that the Galatas does have. And it has a 4-up invul, obviously, from the shield, and the adamantic shielding on the other two gives a 5-up to the Achilles and a 4-up on the Telemon. So that's obviously cool. So it's important to note that the Magnifica banner, -1 to hit, does work on these guys, but the Imperious banner, the +1 to hit, does not, because it says no vehicles. So keep that in mind. It would be so nice if GW let us give +1 attack banner to our Dreads. That would be great. Get on that. Okay. Those are the only rules. They have no other rules. They're fairly straightforward. Okay, let's talk about points. So the Achilles Dreadnought is 160 base. There was a time when the Achilles was only 140 points all in. And that was cheaper than like a unit of Guardians sitting on the back. So you could almost just buy an Achilles Dreadnought and stick it on the back at field objective. Even if it didn't do anything, it was cheaper than Guardians sitting there. But those days were over. It got so much better, and so it went up to 160 base. And then if you want to add the Adrathic Destructors, it's $10 a piece. So that's 180 points. Which, for its output, and as I already mentioned, obviously the melee output is expected, but the shooting output is probably better than you expect and quite useful in this meta right now. So it's probably worth it, and it's a fair price. Base, maybe if it went to like 155, maybe even 150, split the difference but before. But, given all the buffs they received as well from 9th edition, I think, 160 base is a fair price. And so, that's fine. It's still a relatively cheap unit in terms of Custodes. The Galatas is more expensive, and again, so now we're knowing that GW putting the premium on defensive statistics. So it's 10 points more base. You're getting a better invuln at 4-up invuln with the built-in -1 to hit in combat. And but much less shooting and much worse combat potential with the extra attacks. Still, I mean, it's more expensive than the Achilles, but then you put the 2 Adrathics on the Achilles, and now it's 10 points more than the Galatas. So these two are really kind of neck and neck. There was a time when the Galatas Dreadnought was only 155 points all in, and it was quite a good buy back then. But then it was like, didn't do very much. Keontes has a question which I will answer later. I will be covering that, Keontes, in this deep dive. Okay. So I think it's probably fairly priced at 170, maybe slightly cheaper. 165 would be more amenable. 160, 165, something like that. Okay, the Telemon is now way easier to work out how much it costs and is probably as cheap as it ever has been. And it's 260 points all in. So that is, okay, I suck at math. That's 80 points more than the Achilles with Adrathic and 90 points more than the Galatas. So, you get all the options with 260 points, but if you want a Storm Cannon, the Arachnus, then you add 15 points. So really, if you're running a hybrid with an Arachnus, is 275, which is the same price as a unit of Venetaris. Why do I think about that now? Because you're starting to get into the time where you're trying to think, if you're going to pick while we stand, we fight secondary, which guys are going to be the targets. And so you may change the Telemon weapon arm to make it the most expensive or the less expensive, depending on what you want to do. And because that arm probably is not super important decision in the grand scheme of army building, which arm you use. And so, but it matters in terms of playing the game, who's going to be the secondary target for that. So there you go. Arachnus Fist Telemon is the same price as a unit of 5 Venetari. Okay, so 260 points, I think it's fair. We're really paying for the some of the weaponry, but we're paying for the things we already talked about. T8, 14 wounds, 2 up save, 4 up invuln, feel no pain. That's what we're really paying for. And so I think 260 is probably fair. It's a bit more than the other dreads, but it's, a lot less than like a knight, which basically, it just other than wounds, is probably not as good. So I would say 260 is fair. I think that buffing the Arachnus would maybe add points, another 10 points to the gun, or 5 points to the gun. That might start to make it much too expensive, especially with things like Palace tanks with their shooting and bikes with salvos all dropping in price. So, it's points relative to the other options in our army to provide the same shooting is an area of contention for the Telemon, but and with the Achilles doing pretty good combat too. So you're starting to think like maybe the Telemon is losing its spot a little bit, but it will always have that spot to some extent because of how tough it is. So, it's in its own little class, so it's hard to compare just purely based on point by point basis. Okay. All right, some questions flooding in, and we will definitely answer them if we haven't done at the end. Okay, guys? So I got you up on the chat there. Okay, so we're going to compare now. Comparables. Aculus versus Galatus. Okay, so this is one of the most common questions actually being asked on the Discord and being asked to me privately. So let's tackle this question. Which one? Aculus versus Galatus. And there are supporters of the Aculus and there are supporters of the Galatus for sure. As with all these questions, it really depends. Depends on what you want them to do, what you need them to do in your list, what else you have in your list, and who you're playing against. It's the same answer every time. Spoilers. Now, they're pretty well matched, stat-wise, points-wise. So, it's like, how do you choose? They're both awesome models, obviously, and similar in terms of how cool they are. So you can't even use the model coolness as a deciding factor. So how do you choose? So the Aculus hits harder in combat against almost everything that you're going to face. All right, so that's number one. Number two, the Aculus shoots better and has more adaptable weapon choices. Number two, so that's 2-0 for Aculus. What does the Galatus have that's better? Well, it has 1 to 3 more attacks. Does that make up for the extra combat damage? I'm not sure. The Galatus is 10 points cheaper, and the Galatus has a 4-up invuln, -1 to hit in combat. So they're fairly even, but they're different. So what you're going to pick, and I'm sorry to tell you guys this, but I can't make that decision for you, is you pick whichever one, either that you just like best because they'll probably both perform well, or really what your meta demands. So if you're going to be going up against a lot of Death Guard, you probably want to pick the Aculus because it will kill Plague Marines and the Terminators and Blight Lords just as well, do damage to the tanks, kill characters. It will do all those things and definitely help you kill Morty. Whereas the Galatus will kill Plague Marines, sure, cultists, but it's going to struggle a lot more against 3-wound Terminators and be much less effective against things like Morty as well. So, I think it just depends on offense versus defense and who you're going to be playing against. Now, you could argue, well, you don't really need a Dreadnought to be defensive. It's not there to be defensive. It doesn't have OBSEC, so what's it being defensive for? Well, I mean, it can hold things up. So there you go. So that's kind of where that thing lies. If you are playing in a meta where you have like loads of sisters and Tyranid hordes and orc boys and stuff, then you might actually choose to bring the Galatus. Has more attacks, is going to easily kill those things, and has got flamers. But the Achilles also has the Lastrum bolters, which can put out a lot of shots too, and has almost the same number of attacks. So it's really difficult decision. You really kind of depends on what you want and what kind of people you're going to be playing against. All right, but right now, I think if you're trying to do all comers and you only have space for one Dreadnought, I'm going to have to give it to the Achilles right now. Okay? Just based on what's out there right now that could be causing us problems, it's going to be the Achilles. But they're both, as I said, they're neck and neck. Okay, so comparing the Achilles and the I say that different every time I say it. Comparing the Achilles and the Galatus to the Telamon is really not a fair comparison. You can't really compare these two Dreadnoughts. The points are so different, and they're different. But it could even come down to just army slots in the end, or points. It probably comes down more to points than anything else. So can't really compare those. So let's compare the Achilles and the Galatus and the Telamon to other things. Okay. Other things in our army. And this is a fair question because you're going to put these things in at the expense of other things. So what are you losing by bringing a Dreadnought? Okay. So the Achilles and the Galatus are cheap enough and roughly equivalent points-wise to compare to things like 3 Shield Guard or 3 Sagittarium. Those things are running like 155, points. These guys are like 170, 180, so not quite, but, again, you can compare these things, right? Or maybe another HQ and a unit of sisters. A shield captain in Alaris armor and a unit of sisters is kind of the same to one of these Dreadnoughts. So, you kind of compare. A couple of extra bikes, a couple of extra Terminators. These are all things that you're weighing up in your mind when you want to bring your Dreadnought and what else you can bring. The Telamon, for sure, you have these conversations in your head. You're bringing 260 points, 275 points. That's a whole unit of Venatari, as we said. That's a whole unit of Venatari and all that a 5-man unit of Venatari brings. That's 2 Palace tanks and still 70 points to spend on something else. That's like 3 bikes, 3 or 4 Terminators. It's almost 1.5 of the other Dreadnoughts. So you have to make much larger opportunity cost decisions when you're bringing the Telamon. So there you go. And you want to try and replace like with like, right? Like if you don't like what one unit is doing, but you want that, you still need that role, then you need to replace like with like. So, you can't replace a, punchy Telamon with like a 3 units of sisters. That doesn't do the same job, even though it may be, points. But, that's not a good comparison. But you know what I'm saying? Like you have to compare like to like and replace like with like unless you want a different role for that. Okay, let's go on to other comparisons, some fun things. Okay, let's compare our Dreadnoughts to other Dreadnoughts, okay, of which we're talking about Marines then, because Marines, that's where Dreadnoughts come from. So the normal barn door Marine Dreadnought has BS weapon skill 3, strength 6, T7, 8 wounds, 3 up save, no invuln, and is basically 120 points, so it's pretty cheap. And you pay for las cannons $20. It used to be $25. So with decent weaponry like a multi-melta or twin las, it's like 140 points. So yeah, I like our guys more for the extra expenditure. We're already paying more for all of our stuff, so I still feel like it's fair, and our guys are just way better. Okay, so let's compare. That's just a normal Dreadnought. That's not fair to compare to a normal Dreadnought. Let's compare to other Contemptor Dreadnoughts. Okay, so Contemptors are Weapon Skill Ballistic Skill 3, Strength 7, T7, 9 wounds, 3 up, 5 up, invuln for 150 points. So now we're getting into a similar points range to our Contemptors. And they are still not as good because they hit on 3s and not 2s. And so basically they are kind of like our useless Contemptor. They have like Melta and it has an extra shot over ours, but for 5 extra, for not a lot of extra points, you get our guys, which are way better. So again, a win for us. Okay, so let's go to Vendreads. So Vendreads are ballistic skill weapon skill 2, and strength 6 only, T7, 8 wounds, 3 up, and no invuln, and only the feel no pain. So that already makes them worse. And 135 plus weapons. You can get a 4-up invuln if you run a shield, and all the usual weapons. So they are cheaper, but I think even just a standard Vendread is not as good. Okay, let's go to the Ironclad, because that's one of the few other T8 Dreadnoughts. This thing is T8, but it's only strength 6, hitting on 3s, with 3-up save, no invuln for 135 points. Now, interestingly, it can take I gotta honestly say, I haven't looked at this data sheet in forever. It can take a hammer that is strength 12, flat 5 damage, but it's -1 to hit, so it only hits on 4s, so that's a big deal. And it can take a chain fist that, again, strength 12, and is 2d3 damage, so usually 4 to 6 damage, and can be flat 6 against vehicles, so that can hurt a little bit. So comparing this to a Telemon, because these are your two T8 dreads, I mean, it's hard to compare. Telemon has 6 more wounds, 4-up invuln, strength 16, 2 more attacks, but it's almost twice the points. It is twice the points, so it's hard to compare that. Okay, let's talk about the Marine big boy, the Redemptor. So the Redemptor dread hits on 3s and degrades, so already not good. Strength 7, T7, and 13 wounds. So with a 3-up save and no invuln. So this thing is not reaching my threshold for wanting extra wounds. And on top of that is only 3-up save and no invuln. So yeah, not super great. Has a whole variety of different guns, from Daka guns to heavier guns. The heaviest gun it has is that plasma thingy. Its fist is strength 14, AP3, D3 plus 3 damage. So that's pretty good. And of course, it has a base 4 attacks, but it gets +1 from all the Marine rules. So it has 5 attacks. So it's doing similar combat output to the Achilles, which is pretty impressive. And this thing is 175 points. So it is basically directly comparable to 180-point double Adrathic Achilles. But the Achilles is hitting and wounding on 2s, has a 2-up save and a 5-up invuln, and a 6-up feel no pain. And probably on balance has slightly less shooting, but does the same combat. So pretty comparable. Ours wins out even against the Redemptor. Okay, so now we go on to the Forge World Relic Contemptor, which we used to see everywhere. I mean, Francois used to rock 2 of them at every game, 4 las cannons each, and these guys were good for that. I mean, good ballistic skill, strength 7, T7, 9 wounds, 3-up, 5-up invuln, all for 140 points. And with the quad las, for some reason they only paid 50 points for 4 las cannons, and it was 190 points. So I guess that was pretty good for that amount of output. But now it costs you 1 CP to field the relic. That's the new relic rule, basically. So now that kind of sucks. So you don't really see these guys anymore. But it's a decent firepower, but 190 points. I think, as I said last week, GW kind of overvalues las cannons. Okay. Leviathan. The once mighty Leviathan. Oh, it has been laid low. So it was BS3 now. It used to be BS2, so that's a big downgrade. It was T8, now it's T7. Big downgrade. It is still 14 wounds, but degrades. And it used to save all that damage with a 2-up, 4-up invuln, and now it's only a 5-up invuln. So it has 4 attacks still, and obviously we'll get shock assault and all that. So 5 attacks, let's call it. It costs 1 CP to field now because of relic rule, and its weapons are still good. So it is the bombard and the melta thing and the storm can, like, its weapons are still good. And Marine rules still affect it, but it is 220 points base, up to 260 depending on what guns you choose. So we're talking Telemon points here, and I think the Telemon beats it. And I'll take that CP you spent to bring it, and I'll spend it on a penitent to make my Telemon 6 attacks. So yeah, I think the Telemon beats it now. It hits better, it's tougher, it's got better saves, it's got similar number of attacks, you don't need to spend a CP, it's got decent shooting, and you get better combat weapons. So I think the debate is settled now. The Telemon is now better than the Leviathan, just datasheet for datasheet. Obviously, Marine rules may make that slightly different, but okay. Now, just for fun, we're going to compare it to some other things. Bjorn the Fell-Handed. The Space Wolves Dreadnought. So hits on 2s, strength 7. He is T8. I'm not sure if he was T8 before, but he's T8 now. 8 wounds, 5 attacks base. Obviously goes up to 6 with Shock Assault. 3 up save. No invuln. That's always been Bjorn's problem. But he does have his 5 up Feel No Pain. He gives a Captain Aura reroll hit rolls of 1. His shooting is nothing to speak of. Assault Cannon and a Heavy Flamer, although Assault Cannon with Devastator is a little bit better. His claw strength 12 minus 4 D6 damage with reroll wounds. And I gotta say, Space Wolves players must be pretty salty that old Bjorn is stuck with D6 damage. He's 175 points. Of course, it's hard to compare, and we're not really comparing, just brought him up because he is an HQ, though, and there's a bunch of rules and things that you can give to HQs. And Space Wolf HQs generally have some nice rules, and so it's hard to make a direct comparison. But, that's just, that's Bjorn for you. Okay, Blood Angels Libby Dreadnought. So Libby Dreadnought is, again, he's an HQ, and now you add on the fact that he's a Psyker. So he has two casts and 1 deny. So, what's the points value on that? That's hard to know. Weapon skill, strength 6, T7, 8 wounds, 4 attacks, but as we all know, these guys can get Shock Assault, and then they can get a whole bunch of extra attacks and like Death Company shit, and so they can get pretty beefy. 3 up, no invuln, 150 points. I mean, that seems pretty cheap for something that's so hitty and is also a Psyker. And of course, HQ, character protection, all that usual stuff. So, I don't know, man. That seems pretty cheap for a Psyker Dreadnought. But okay, let's look at some other interesting things. Grey Knight's Nemesis Dread Knight. So we're not talking about the Grandmaster Dread Knight, just the normal Nemesis Dread Knight. So assuming the side cannon hammer loadout, this guy hits on 3s, strength 6 only, T6 only, 12 wounds, so he degrades, and 4 attacks base. I think they get Shock Assault, I can't remember, but that also degrades. And a 2-up save and a 5-up invuln, which obviously with things like Sanctuary and stuff can go to 4-up invuln. So decent save, but being T6, only 12 wounds and degrading is kind of hurts. And the hitting on 3s when the hammer is a -1 to hit as well. D6 min 3 damage at strength 12. Obviously it's a Psyker, which again adds to the cost. And it has native Deep Strike, which adds to the cost as well. And this thing is 175 points, which seems expensive when you ask the Libby Dreadnought what's up. So there you go. I guess they're paying extra for that Deep Strike ability. Yeah. Okay. And the final comparison I'm going to do is the Telemon versus Morty. So just as a pure academic exercise, because there's been a lot of teeth gnashing recently about how hard it is to shoot Morty to death. And generally you want to try and shoot him to death because if you get in close to him, he's going to do all sorts of nasty things to you. So trying to shoot Morty to death versus trying to shoot Bertha to death. Okay, I don't know how many points Morty is, like 500 points or something. And you can shoot him because he got 18 wounds. So he is 18 wounds, T8, 3-up armor. What a scrub 3-up armor for a Primarch. and 4 up invuln, and 5 up feel no pain, which is good. Like, he retained the disgusting resilient, which is annoying, but he got it. And then he can be -1 to hit with a spell, so let's assume that he has that for now. And of course, he's -1 damage from Death Guard's shit. Now, none of the other rules matter at this point because we're just shooting at him from across the table, okay? So all the auras turning off and all that stuff, -1, none of that. We're just talking how hard is it to kill Morty at range with shooting versus Bertha. So what is Bertha? Bertha is only 260 points. She is T8, same as Morty. She has 14 wounds, so 4 wounds less. She has a 2-up save, better than Morty's 3-up power armor. 4-up invuln, same invuln. And her feel no pain is only 6-up feel no pain, which is way worse than a 5-up feel no pain. I grant you that one. With a Vexilla nearby, so if we tack 90 points on to her 260, so we're up to 350 now. With the Vexilla nearby, she's -1 to hit. And with a CP expenditure, she can be -1 strength, so make Melta wound you on 5s, which is huge. Maybe that even makes up for the 5 up to 6 up feel no pain difference. So actually, it's just as almost, someone would have to math it out, but it seems like it's a fairly good race in how hard it is to shoot Bertha to death versus shooting the new fandangled Morty to death. There you go. Food for thought. Okay. We are running a bit long. We're going to speed ahead. Okay. Lots to talk about. Okay, stratagems. Okay, so this is the section where we go over what stratagems you can use. So, number 1, Grim Responsibility from Shadowkeepers. I think if you're running Telemon, you have to be really wanting to run Shadowkeepers. If you're running Dreads in general and vehicles in general, you really want to be running Grim Responsibility from Shadowkeepers. -1 strength, as I said all last week on the Vehicle Tactica, so good on T7, T8, you really want it. And if you're not running it, you should wonder why you're not running it. In my latest list, which is up on the Discord, I've got 2 patrols. The Shadowkeeper patrol has all the Dreadnoughts in it, and the EI patrol has all the other non-Dreadnoughts. So that's how it's worked out. Okay, Shield of Honor from Aquiline Shield. Yes, you can protect a character using your Dreadnought for a CP, but your Dreadnought already kind of protects the character from getting shot, so it's really just against snipers, so, yeah. But it's there, it's kind of gimmicky, and I feel like you wouldn't run a whole Shield host just for that. Okay, Morades. So obviously if you're running Dread Host and you're running Dreads, you will probably end up using Morades, but God, that's a lot of CP to spend on putting them up in the first place and then bringing them down. So, I mean, it seems like a lot. But using Golden Light of the Morades with Eternal Penitent is a nice combo to make that a little bit more reliable. But again, the CP, that's a lot of CP. Okay, obviously from Golden Light, so if you want to deep strike your Dreads, you're going to have to spend CP to put them into space, and then you're stuck with a 9-inch charge. To be honest, these days, on a good terrain table with 9-inch and 8-inch movements, you don't really need to deep strike these guys, and you don't need the reroll charges from EP, really, if you're playing on a table like that. So I would strongly urge people to consider not deep striking their Dreads, save their CP for other things. I'd rather you spend a CP on Eternal Penitent for the extra attack than on deep striking them. Okay, Teleport Homer. Obviously, if you did deep strike your Dread and you really needed to get in combat, you probably want to Homer it or something like that. Indomitable Guardians. So don't forget Dreads can use Indomitable Guardians to interrupt. Wisdom of the Ancients is a much forgotten strat that we have. I first rediscovered it when I was running Caladius tanks with Telemon at the back, and once Trajan and the characters left and my stuff gunline was still at the back, then Bertha could pop Wisdom of the Ancients and give a Captain Aura reroll 1s to everybody, including herself. So that's a really nice stratagem, especially if you're running and you're crossing the table and you're all spread out and you only have Trajan and he's somewhere over there. Your Dreadnought can pass a reroll 1s to hit Aura for a CP. So, don't forget about Wisdom of the Ancients. Ancient Artifice. So this strat obviously is going to get used. Right now it only applies to the Codex Dreadnought, which we already mentioned that nobody's using. So this strat will probably get reworked into something else because everyone has it now on their datasheet. Eternal Penitent. Okay, so this is obviously a good buff. Extra attack, reroll charges, all for a CP. That's a good buff. You can't argue with that. The question is, how much do you need it versus the opportunity cost of spending a CP? So we're going to talk about that at the end, okay? So, yeah. Okay. Fortress of Willpower. So don't forget, Dreadnoughts can use Fortress of Willpower. So if they're getting targeted by a cheeky smite or something, you can use it. Indomitable Engines. So Dreads are vehicles, so they can get a 5-up Funeral Pain against mortals, and that comes in handy sometimes quite a lot, especially against Psychers and against things like Grey Knights and stuff. It can be useful. Superior Fire Patterns. So the only way this applies to our Dreads is the Aculus running Lastrum. With Superior Fire Patterns, this one Dreadnought puts out 16 shots. That's pretty good for a little pew, 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 pew. So, I mean, I don't know if that's worth it or not. Depends on what you're trying to do. But you can use Superior Fire Patterns on his Lastrum Bolters. Oh, infantry only. Okay, I'm wrong. Anyway, I don't think you would want to do that, but infantry only, ignore that last statement. Okay. So Emperor's Old Spice. So obviously, you can use Old Spice to keep people alive. And actually, I've used that many times to try and keep Bertha alive. You denying rerolls, so Emperor's Old Spice is good. Blood Game Vets, I believe, also works on Dreads. But again, with low number of attacks, probably not something that's too useful. But let's say you got like a Galatus and you're trying to go up against like a T7, T8 thing. You got like 6 to 8 attacks. You want it to auto wound. I mean, it's usable, but probably not a great target for it. And finally, Fraternity of Heroes. So don't forget that your Dreads can heroically intervene with this stratagem or with the Warlord trait too. But definitely don't forget heroic intervention. So Charity Hammer Out Cancer, Friday Night, Harrison playing against Tyranids. He forgot that they can intervene with this strat, and that changed the whole thing that the Tyranid player wanted to do, because he thought he could get close and sneak onto objectives, but the Dreadnoughts definitely could have intervened into there. All right. So lists. So I'm not going to give you a list with Dreadnoughts in it. I think all the things we've talked about, you can probably work out if you want a Dread or not and which one you need. People are starting to realize how good the Dreads are in terms of shooting and combat prowess per the points. But the difficulty is still the slot for a lot of people, the elite slots. But with SAGs coming back and more Shield Guardians going down in points, you're seeing more battalions, double patrols, and it's people starting to drop the Vexilla, and so you're starting to see more Dreads. The current list I have up on the Discord runs 2 Aculus Dreadnoughts and a Telemon, all in a patrol of Shadowkeepers, and I'm super, super excited to actually play it. Unfortunately, it's lockdown right now, but super excited to watch these guys give it a little bit of a go on the tabletop. And I just really like the Aculus Dreads with the Adrathics. It's the kind of shooting that I need right now. It's got the spear as well for some longer range anti-vehicle shooting with flat damage. I mean, I'm loving that. And the amount of damage this thing can do in combat is just great. It's fast. And with a 5-up invuln, it's okay. So I'm liking that right now. Hybrid Telemon is where it's at for me right now. I think with a little bit of shooting to shoot, 3, 6, 9 wounds off something, and then to be able to punch the lights out of anything, I think it's great right now. I think right now the Galatus doesn't cut it for me. It doesn't do it as much damage as the other 2 in shooting or in combat, and I don't need that toughness from that particular role. So I think it is the one that's sitting on the bench, and it will in fact soon be getting Aculus arms, so it looks like an Aculus. Okay. So some play strategy notes. Okay, so I got some notes that people ask. So, should I deep strike or foot slog my dreadnoughts? As I already said, I think generally probably foot slog is good enough. If you play on a table with enough terrain, which you should be doing, then I would say you can almost always foot slog them, go from building to building. I mean, it's a bit of a pain to kind of have to go around, but it's usually not a big deal. 9-inch move with advanced rolls, like it's pretty good. And if you want to deep strike it, it's going to cost you CP, 1 CP or 3 CP, and then you probably want to spend the CP to homer it, or if you're doing Morades, if you're doing Dread Host, and then if you really want to, if you don't, then you really got to spend the CP on Penitence. You can get a reroll chart. Like, it just becomes super CP heavy to do all that, and it's probably not really worthwhile. So I think you just play them on the screen, play them on the table. They help you screen, they help you with table coverage, and they help project some force forward, which, as I always talk about, is important. So the next question is always Eternal Penitent. When should you put it on, and how many? So if you're running 3 dreads, do you put 3 Eternal Penitents on? Well, I think you got to, the opportunity cost here is CP, right? And again, these guys can soak up a whole bunch of CP. Let's say EP, then you want to deep strike, that's another CP. Then you want to come in 9 inches, you need your Penitent or your Morades, that's like another, it just adds up to a lot of CP. So I don't think you need Eternal Penitent. As Kevin would like to point out on the Discord, 1 extra attack is not a huge deal. I mean, even without it, you're like the Acolyte's putting out 20 to 30 damage. Like, he's probably not going to miss that extra attack. Sometimes you will, but is it worth the CP is the question, right? And then reroll charges, if you're foot slogging, doesn't actually come in handy that often. And then that one time a game when you do need to reroll charge, then you just spend that CP then instead of spending it up front. So it kind of depends. If you have the CP, then put Eternal Penitent on whichever Dreadnought you want to have an extra attack and a reroll charge. If you got if you don't play your Telemon aggressively, then don't put it on the Telemon. If you play a punchy Telemon that you want to get stuck in right away, then put it on the Telemon. So it kind of really depends on how you play your Dreadnoughts and how much CP you have. If you're running a Vanguard just to play these guys and you start at 9 CP, then you're spending an extra Relic 8 CP, then the CC trait for 7 CP. You're not going to then go spend CP on Eternal Penitent. It's not going to be, you need your CP for other things. We're so CP dependent. So if you're running a battalion and you start with 12, then you spend 1 CC trait now at your 11, and you spend no other CP, then go ahead, spend 2-3 CP on Eternal Penitent. So I think it really depends on your army. So for my list, I'm running a double patrol, so I'm at 10 CP. I've spent 1 on a CC trait, so that's 9 CP, and I'm toying with the idea of spending 1 more CP on Eternal Penitent, so I start with 8. 8 for me is the minimum I want to play a game with to start with, because then you go up to 9. So I've got 2 Acolytes and 1 Telemon. So who do I put the EP on? I don't know. It's either one of the Acolytes or the Telemon. It really depends on what I want to do. So I haven't decided yet. But this is kind of the thought process you need to go through in terms of, do you spend CP on EP, and when and how many and who to put it on? So I can't answer all the questions for you, but this is just some guidance in terms of what to do in that situation. Okay, so that is it. My voice is going. We're going to answer chat questions. There were some chat questions further up. Let's see. Mostly comments. My budget only allows me to purchase 2 Contemptors. I'm guessing it is probably worth it to get 1 of each or 2 Acolytes. You know what? I would get 1 of each, magnetize the arms, and then get somebody or find bits for duplicates so that you can have 2 of each. There you go. Galactus seems inferior in the damage output department, but with all the Marines, his 2 damage source seems perfect. Sure. I mean, for sure, 2 damage and 3 damage, good for killing Marines, for sure. There's going to be a Death Guard explosion, especially where I live. There's a lot of people play Death Guard and Chaos, and so the flat 3 actually maybe not even that good enough for me. I mean, it's good to kill Plague Marines, but it's going to struggle more against the Terminators. Guys at Tabletop Titans suggest using Telemon to screen the Vexilla as you walk them up the middle of the pitch. You can use the Teleport Homer. That's a perfectly viable option. The Telemon can screen for any character, and certainly the Vexilla then helps protect the Telemon. So that's a nice way of delivering the Vexilla. Okay, those were all the midstream questions that I went back for there. Okay. All right, let's go to the Discord. Okay, Telemon or smaller ones. Okay, we talked about that. Best weapon, talked about that. Should you ever deep strike? Talked about it. Most competitive out of Galactus, so we talked about it. Should you EP? We talked about it. If the Exemplar wasn't so ugly, would you run one? I guess he means the Codex Dread, and we talked about that, and the answer is no. Galactus Dread, should I deep strike it or run it up? Run it up. Worth it to take Atlas Galactus over a Vexilla if your elite slot limited. Well, I mean, they're not really comparable units. Just take what you need. Best way to deploy and move up if they're not in deep strike. Very carefully. Which additional war gear options are worth the extra points? Is it worth to invest a CP? So we talked about that. Better running 2 Telemon than 1 Ares. You can't compare those 2 units. I mean, you know, an Ares is a flying, shooting tank, whereas the Telemon generally doesn't kill too much shooting, but is very punchy. So yeah, it's very difficult to make that comparison. Money-wise, the Ares is probably still more expensive than 2 Telemons. Which weapons will be best on a line breaker Telemon? So I'm not sure what you mean by line breaker Telemon. Do you mean like a Telemon that you're going to drop into your opponent's zone? If they allow you to drop this mother base into their zone, then probably you want a hybrid. I think hybrid's just better right now in most circumstances. How many Eradicators does it take to kill a Telemon? I don't know. Somebody math it out. There's a bunch of questions here. Which strats, blah, blah, blah. Somebody can do this math for Protoculture. Hey, he's the guy who runs the PowerPoint presentations. He could do a presentation on math of killing the Telemon. There you go. There. This is the next stream for you, Protoculture. There you go. Why is Telemon so good for where we stand, where we fight? Because it's expensive and it's hard to kill. And can't do much. Which did you learn? Okay. Well, sorry. Does a stratagem? No, somebody answered that. Which dread makes the best Vexilla escort for the points? Well, I mean, that's hard to compare because the points are so different, right? Like, yeah, I think the Telemon is obviously the best escort if you can afford 260 points. Yeah. And how many dreads is too many dreads? I don't know. The most I've seen in a list is 5. That's probably too many. At least they don't give up grind them down points anymore. But I think, like with all things, there's probably diminishing returns if you have too many. I mean, you need things to do other things in your army. So I would say like 3 is probably an optimal number, 3 to 4, depending on what they are. So yeah. What do you think of 3 Telemon lists? I don't really like 3 Telemons. I think, again, diminishing returns. It's just a lot of points, like over 1,000 points. I think you need other things in your army to be successful. Sean Stryker, I think he meant a Telemon that charges the front lines to get the Vexilla deep into their lines. Okay, so it's not actually that hard, as you have seen many times on the stream, to get the Vexilla where you need it to go. And I think if you're going to be charging your Telemon forward, you're going to garner much more respect from your opponent if you have a fist. Because in my experience of playing the double gun Telemon back when, is people learn that it's much safer to be in combat with you than it is for you to be just shooting them out if you don't have a fist. Because you can still shoot them in combat, but you're -1 to hit. You're way less efficient, and your combat fighting is not doing anything. So even like a unit of, guardsmen, like hold you up for a little bit, and you can't fall back and shoot. So I think if you're going to run a Telemon straight into your opponent like that, you either hybrid it or punchy Telemon to get the respect you need to make the space. Okay. It's been an hour and a half, guys. Sorry, it went a little bit long, but we had a lot to cover. No more streams for the rest of this week because I got meetings next week. Wednesday, I'm going to be testing out some stream tech with Francois and Nick. It's not a show, but you're going to see us go live, so don't worry about it. You don't need to watch. You can join us if you want. But and then next week, we're going to have some shows. And yeah, so we'll be back next week. Everybody stay safe, please. And follow your local COVID rules. Thank you for subscribing, following, Patreon, and all that stuff. Thank you very much, guys. And we'll see you later. Have a good week.